As a Christian, we should be consistent. We're pro-life all the way. We're also pro-truth. We have to go into dark places and cast light upon darkness. That's our job. And I found that far too many Christians have looked for places that are comfortable. They want churches that are comfortable. The disciples didn't know much about comfortable after Jesus left. 11 of them were martyred. John was exiled. Took care of Mary, but they all suffered. And suffering for righteousness' sake is just part of being a Christian, but by golly, that doesn't mean we ever hate anybody.
Thank you for joining us for another fire conversation. All right, so today we have a special guest, and his name is Kirk Beck, and he has an awesome story that he has to share. He has a ton of value that he's going to provide. So if you're watching this or if you're listening to this, I think that you're really going to enjoy it. Kirk, thanks for joining us today. Can you just let people know a little bit about who you are and what is something like really pressing, something that God has laid on your heart recently?
It's my great joy to be here with you, Jason, and to share the experiences that I've been working through for the last 5 decades.
Mm.
It's a long story. I was born in South Dakota 75 years ago. I trained to be an engineer at South Dakota Tech in Rapid City, South Dakota, and had the opportunity to play football there and play in the game that was later called the upset of the century. Playing a football game that's called the upset of the century is a pretty amazing thing. So that's my claim to fame when it comes to athletics. But from there, I went into the Army for a short period of time. It was at the end of the Vietnam War, so second lieutenants were not in demand. They were actually being put into the reserves. So I spent 6 months in Washington, D.C., and then I was brought off into the reserves for the next 8 years. I was in the Corps of Engineers. I don't have any combat experience, and I'm glad I don't have any. I took a job with Shell Oil Company. I worked with Shell Oil Company for a couple of years, but I really understood that my calling is to educate. I really enjoy young people, and I went off into teaching mathematics. But on a couple of occasions, I had a chance in the summer school to teach civics. And coming from a Christian perspective, I felt it was important to give the Christian background of the United States and how we were founded as basically a Christian nation. And I was really inspired by these young kids because I showed them the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Jason, have you ever seen that movie?
I haven't seen it.
Oh, well, I'll tell you what, Jason, that's on your to-watch list.
Yeah, let me make a note of that right now. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Yeah. 1939 movie with Jimmy Stewart, and black and white. I'm showing it to these 100 seniors in high school, and I asked him, now, be patient with this movie, because I want you to see the end of this movie. And when it was all over, I asked these students to rate the movie 0 to 10, 0 being terrible and 10 being the best movie I've ever seen. I got nobody, out of 100 students, I got nobody with anything less than an 8. The great majority were 9s, and I had a couple of kids coming in saying, hey, that black and white 1939 movie is the best movie I've ever seen.
You know what? That's actually spot on because I'm looking this up right now, and according to IMDb, it has a rating of 8.1 out of 10 on average, and Rotten Tomatoes gives it a 97%. So
Wow.
yeah, So that's definitely a good one. I'll have to check that out.
Well, the last 10 minutes is one man standing against the world
Mm.
in the United States Senate. And in watching this movie, I rate eh, these kind of theatrical performances in three methods. I'd say, does it entertain? Oh, yeah, this movie entertained. Does it educate? Wow, it really does educate because you actually learn how the Senate works, the United States Senate, some of the rules. At the last, the most important one, does it elevate the soul of men? And boy, does it ever. Because what these kids want are models and a purpose. And if we give young people purpose and models, they'll grab onto it. So I believe that the young generation is just waiting for us to come along and show them how to do it. Before we go any farther, though, I want to make a mention that at the end of this presentation, I'm going to have a free gift that will be offered to all the viewers. It'll be very helpful to them if they want to take up the mantle that I'm presenting to them, become activists for justice in the name of Jesus.
Okay, awesome. Definitely make sure that you stick around to the end so that you don't miss that, right? Because I'm sure that it's going to be very beneficial to you. Some of what I've read about you, I think some people might consider it to be controversial. There's a lot of people who say, I'm just not into politics. That's not my thing. I don't watch the news. I don't care who wins the election. It doesn't really impact my life, right? But we know that couldn't be further from the truth. But just for those people who really want to understand more about this and maybe understand more of your heart, right? I want to ask you about, just from your perspective, our biblical responsibility. Do you think that Jesus calls Christians to influence culture through getting involved in things like politics? Or is it more in line with scripture to take more of a passive stance and step away from it?
The human being needs direction in life. And Christians are the light to be the light of the world. We carry the truth that Jesus gave to us. And there's no place on earth where the gospel doesn't apply.
Mhm.
So politics is just one of the areas, but I do hasten to point out, I am not talking about partisan politics.
Okay, okay.
And George Washington left, he wrote the American people his farewell address. And he put forth 5 caveats that the Americans were to be watchful for. The number one was, be careful regarding partisan politics.
Mm.
Partisan politics has the potential to tear the country apart. He said that was the number one possible problem that the American Republic was going to experience. So I'm so happy that I'm really divorced from partisan politics. Um, I got involved in a political campaign in 2012. It hasn't been until 2024 that I got involved again. I was working for a congressman. He didn't win. That's usually the case when I get involved in partisan politics. I usually take somebody who stands for something really, really great, and the people just aren't ready for it. But I'm now talking to those same people and saying, look, we lost the election, but what I'm telling you about how to impact our county and our city using the power of paper, the affidavit process is a beautiful way to bring about justice into the culture without getting mired down into personality. We don't need to follow that road. We can simply stay above the fray and present the facts to people. And when those people are in government positions, they're constrained by an oath that they took to defend the Constitution of the United States, as well as, in my case, the Constitution for the state of California. When they wander outside of that, it's we, the people's responsibility, to call them to account firmly, politely, tactfully, and admonish them. Look, you're outside your parameters here. You got to get back inside there. One of the great books that I recommend everybody to read is The Law by Frederick Bastiat, a Frenchman who wrote the book in 1850. And in that book, he said several wonderful, insightful things that I've never forgotten. One of them is, if the law can be kept to its proper boundaries, it really makes no difference who votes, and it really doesn't make a lot of difference who's elected. But it's we, the people's responsibility, to keep government inside the box, inside the Constitution. When they step outside of it, then we have to inform them. One of the things that I teach is rules of law. What are the rules of law, or common law? And the first rule is notification. If you have a problem with somebody, even a potential problem with somebody in government, you need to educate them. You need to notify them that there's a potential problem so that we don't need to have an escalation of the problem later. You'll understand what I'm talking about. So I first learned this, Jason, just because I often admit I'm a recidivist when it comes to rolling stops in my automobile. And I get these every once in a while. I've lived in California almost 40 years. I've only gotten 5, so it's not like I'm doing it every day. I'm certainly not doing it in a way that would ever threaten anybody. But I use this process in order to hold government accountable. And one of the rules of law also is that there can't be a crime unless it's a victim. So if I'm doing something that doesn't victimize anybody else, you could call it an infraction, but you can't call it a crime. Well, I researched the law and I found out, no, wait a minute. In California, you don't get an attorney for an infraction. Why is that? Because infraction's not a crime. There's no victim, so there's no crime. It's just an infraction. Oh, but wait a minute. The law also says that a police officer can't stop you for an infraction. What? No, that's really the truth. He can only stop you, arrest you, if he's serving a warrant, if he's acting on a verifiable complaint by an actual American human being, or he's witnessing an actual crime. But the Supreme Court of California said rolling stops aren't crimes, they're infractions. You don't get a jury, you don't get a attorney in your court, you don't get a jury trial in court. So all I did is just put it together in an affidavit. And by the way, an affidavit is simply a declaration of truth based upon valid law, evidence, facts, and truth that is duly notarized by a government official, which could be somebody down at the bank. That's where I do all my notifications. I put it in the mail. I send it certified mail, and I get the green card back, which tells me he got it. So if we ever go to court, I would just bring the green card out and show it to the judge. Your Honor, this is the affidavit that you received. You received it on such and such a date, and I'm appealing to common law that if he doesn't rebut the affidavit, then it stands as truth in the courtroom. And when I went to court, when the deputy sheriff showed up, he looked at me, I looked at him, he gave a piece of paper to the bailiff. The bailiff gave it to the judge, and 2 minutes later, the judge, Mr. Beck, are you Mr. Beck? Yeah, your case has been dropped. You may leave. Now, I walked out, I'm thinking, I've lost all these other cases because I'm in there squirreling around and just bringing up odd topics. I didn't have to say a word in court. My paperwork did it for me. And that's why we call it the power of paper. And it's such a wonderful mechanism because all we're doing is we're telling our adversary, what we believe he did wrong. If, in fact, we are wrong, it's the government official job to notify us. After all, they wanted the job. Nobody forced it on them, whether they're a legislator, a member of the executive branch enforcing the law, or a judicial officer. They're getting paid pretty good money, and they have to know the law, and they have to tell us the law. That's part of their job. So in the case of the police officer, I sent him an affidavit. I explained to him exactly what he did wrong. I'm pretty sure he ran that up to the legal department, and the legal department probably came back and said, there's bigger fish in the pond to catch than this guy. Just let him go. I'm pretty sure the legal eagle upstairs didn't say, he's quoting the law the way it really is, and we're really out there scamming people. I know he didn't say that.
Right.
Nevertheless, when I won that case, I realized this is really what my mentors, Jack and Margy Flynn, have been doing for 6 decades since they met in high school, is really true. So when Jack and Margy told me they have 10,000 victories, I began to believe maybe it is true. Jason, since that time, I have 4 more victories just using paper.
The power of paper. That's you call it the power of
paper. The Constitution is written on paper. The gospel is written on paper. It's good to have it in our hearts. When you go into the courtroom, you're not going to stand in front of the judge and start reading the Constitution. But if you have it in your heart, as I do, I don't have it by word, but I know certain things in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence.
You understand the spirit of the Constitution, even if you're not quoting it line by line, right? It's like, like knowing the spirit of the law, which is the issue that Jesus had with the Pharisees.
Yeah.
They knew the law, like they could quote it, but they didn't understand the heart behind it. And that's why they tried to use it against him to try to catch him up. But he was always 10 steps ahead of them because, right? Well, of course he wrote it, right? He is the author of it, but he understood the spirit of the law.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So yeah, that's good. That's a really interesting way to look at it, right? Both the word of God and the Constitution.
The Declaration of Independence. I want to quote to you a portion from the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson wrote these words. He, speaking of the king, has combined with others, speaking of Parliament and the colonial governors, he has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution. Declaration of Independence was written in 1776. The U.S. Constitution didn't come until 11 years later. So Jefferson wasn't talking about the United States Constitution. He was talking about English common law. That's what guided the colonies when they came here. It was the common law of England that they were all acquainted with. It was based upon common sense. Of course, one of the facts of common sense is no victim, no crime. But to finish the quote, he has subjected us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and given his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. Pause for those words. Pretended legislation. The Supreme Court of the United States has told us what that is. The Supreme Court has said if a government passes a statute that is not constitutional, it is not law. And it is the responsibility of the American people not to obey it. Similar to what Peter said to the Pharisees when he said, you want me to stop preaching Jesus? That's not going to happen.
Right.
I cannot stop but preach Jesus Christ crucified. Government tells us something that's contrary to God's law and to the Constitution. We have a moral responsibility to stand against it and not cave in. I quoted Jefferson earlier when he was talking about a constitution foreign to our, a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution. I'm talking about the common law. Now, and people don't understand much about common law. I give you an illustration of common law. This is an actual situation that took place with a police officer who was a Christian. He said he's a Christian, but he was a hardened guy. His heart was very hard. And I said to him, let's say you're walking down the street and you cross the street, there's two men over there that are mugging a woman. What would you do about it? And he said, well, based upon what I know about the law, I would just keep walking. I said, well, let me change that. That woman across the street is your mother. Now what are you going to do? And of course, his attitude changes. He's not going to keep walking down the street when two men are over there mugging his mother.
Right.
He'd say, when you walk across that street, that's common law. That's your mother over there. That's not just some woman. That's a woman that just as good as your mother. She's somebody else's mother. She's somebody else's daughter. And you have a responsibility under the common law to go to her aid. Blackstone's Commentaries on the Law. If an American had only two books during the colonial years, they largely were the Bible, number one, and then they had Blackstone's Commentaries on the Law. The colonial governors would often relate back to Parliament and say, excuse the expression, but they would say, these damn Americans, they're all a bunch of lawyers.
Yeah.
Because they knew the law. John Adams, Patrick Henry, these guys were many levels above our typical politicians today. They were extremely well schooled. They understood the classics, and they were very well endowed with understanding of law. And they went out of their way, in many cases, to go to the aid of other people, using their expertise. John Adams defended the British soldiers who were guilty of killing people in the Boston Massacre. John Adams understood common law. These British soldiers needed to be defended. And he was successful in getting them found not guilty. The crowd agitated them, threatened them to such an extent that they felt they had to shoot in order to defend themselves. John Adams was crucified, not literally, but for a while he was really held in contempt because he went to the aid of British soldiers. But that's common law. Jason, during the last election of 2020, when the question came out about voter fraud, over and over and over and over, we heard denied for lack of standing, denied for lack of standing, denied for lack of standing. You understand what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The court wasn't going to hold the case, but he said, you haven't been harmed by it. But under common law, if they harm Jason, they harm me. If they harm me, then Jason's on my side. You can see how this is going to cause a political tsunami. They have to come after somebody, and all of a sudden, we're there next to them.
Is that language there, that terminology, common law, is that the reason why you have, say, like a common law marriage? Is that the same category? Is it because it has to do with, that relation to that other person?
Yes. We have many, many centuries of English common law where it became common sense. This is the way we operate. You don't have to have it written down. We just know by tradition, this is the way the law works. We didn't have law schools when the when the colonists came over here, they had the Bible and they had Blackstone. They went to the Bible and they went to Blackstone. And that ended the day. Now we've got people who want to put the Bible off and say it's a book of myths. No, the book is a law book. Blackstone's a law book. Put them together, the colonies were able to govern themselves. They didn't need a lot of government intrusion into their lives. Look, I know they're killing babies. Wow. 1.5 miles from where I live. They're killing babies. They'll kill some more this week. I know they're killing babies there. So I put an affidavit together. I send it to the district attorney in our city. I send another affidavit to the sheriff. I send another affidavit to the police chief. I send affidavits to the local judges, and I'm saying, hey, listen, we know they're killing babies down here. These babies are being slaughtered. I have a common law duty to stop that. I'm not going to stop it by blowing up the building. I'm going to stop it by holding myself in front of the building like was done in 1990, probably before you were born. I don't know. In 1990, we had something that was called basically, I forgot the name of the group, but they would just sit in front of clinics and the police would come in and have to take them out. They destroyed that movement by going after the leaders and hitting them with RICO violations, racketeering violations. And that broke the back of the movement. But I didn't know what I know now about affidavit. I didn't know that back then. Matter of fact, I'm only 7 years into this, but I keep thinking about it. My gosh, they're responsible to answer my affidavit.
Wow.
It's a fact they're killing babies down there. It's a fact that it's a human life. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to have a moral responsibility to stop this.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
point is, I'm going to the proper authorities in the county and I'm saying, help me. Why are we allowing this? And I have an obligation not only to God, but also to the common law. They're killing little babies in there. And this place also, I don't know if they still are, but they used to be one of the primary sources of delivery of baby organ, hearts, livers, pancreases from little babies. They were selling baby parts down there. That's totally in violation of the law.
Right.
We've never had that kind of thing legalized where you could sell the heart of a baby or its eyeballs. Obviously, we have to do more research on this. But I just know that we have a moral responsibility when somebody is attacked to come to their aid. And 20 minutes before this program today, I'm finding out that in my local school district, the cross-country team, a young runner on the women's cross-country team, has been removed from the team because a trans woman has a better time and gets to run in her place. And I watched a 5-minute video of the team captain of the cross-country team talking to the school board. She did a great job of pointing out it's not right. It's not right that we girls have to have a boy in our locker room. It's not right. We don't feel comfortable. It's not safe. And I'm thinking to myself, yep. Well, I went to my data and I found the athletic director's home address. So I'm thinking I'm penning an affidavit to her. She's the one who told the girls, you have to take that T-shirt off. What did the T-shirt say? Save girls sport. The athletic director says that inflames hostility in other people. Tough. Get used to it. This is not vulgar. This is simply telling people what she thinks is important. And I'm probably going to put an affidavit in the mail, get it notarized, and then have it sent to her home address, not to the school. I'm going after her. And I love her. I want her to change. I don't know who she is. Her name's Amanda, first name. Amanda, what you're doing is wrong. You're violating her right of freedom of expression. According to common law, you go after, I forgot her name, you go after her, you're going after me. Only difference is I'm not 17 or 16 years old. I'm 18 years old or older, and I'll sue you in court. I mean, that's what I say. Refute what I've got in the body of my affidavit. Otherwise, everything in it can be used against you.
Right.
When the story broke on the news, the first thing I wanted to know was, okay, I understand the school. They said the athletic director, but you haven't given me any name. I'm not going to send an affidavit to an athletic director. I'm going to send an affidavit to the athletic director's name.
Right.
And if there's any school board members that are problematic also, we'll get their names and we'll send affidavits to them. By the way, that athletic director took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of California. And the state of California has not yet passed a law which would be unconstitutional, taking away a woman's right for her privacy in a locker room. I mean, 90% of Americans think this is stupid, that women are having men come into their locker room. So we have to call them to account. I'm not mad at Amanda. She's just missing it. Probably people putting pressure on her. Now she can come back and say, well, golly, I'm getting these affidavits and I might have to go to court. So that's why I'm going to have to change my policy and let her wear a shirt.
Hmm.
I just want to put the positive pressure on her. She's getting negative pressure probably. We'll get some positive pressure on them. Hey, you could be going to court over this. That's common law. They come after you, they're coming after me. We're all in this together.
Wow. Yeah. That's a gem right there. People need to have a greater understanding of not only their civic responsibility, but even their ability, right? Because some people might say, well, I would love to be able to do something about some of these things, but I think most people don't even know that they can. So I think that that's really important what you just shared.
I've been fighting these battles for 40 years. It's only since I found out the power of paper. And it's given me such freedom. I have such hope. It's not like I carry that much of a worry anymore because I know how we can win. When you're losing all the time, losing all the time, losing all the time, you get discouraged and give up. And that's what happens to a lot of Christians. They don't see victory, so they just start giving up. Well, God gave us this country. It's a gift. It's a gift to the world. It's the greatest thing that we can export to the world is liberty. Not our guns, not our bombs, but liberty. That's our job as Christians. Let's stop exporting bombs and let's start exporting love and liberty. And we'll be a country that the world will love.
So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, right? Because one of these things that people challenge and say is not constitutional, some debate on whether or not this is accurate, but some say that paying taxes is not considered constitutional or that there is some kind of loophole or something when it comes to that. What is your understanding of that? And do you agree with that? Or do you think that that doesn't apply in this case?
It does. Taxes are extremely important. The point is, though, that taxes must be constitutional.
Mhm.
If they're not constitutional taxes, then you have moral responsibility not to pay them. I was sitting at a table once and guys were arguing about the income tax. And I'm thinking to myself, well, am I going to say anything here? Because the income tax, even the Bruce Jobber versus Union Railroad case said it's no new tax at all. You can call it an income tax, but it's no new tax. It was an excise tax before. It's an excise tax now. You want to call it income tax? Okay, but it's still an excise tax. Most of us do not engage in the kind of activities that require us to pay income tax. There are some people who do have to pay it, but they've asked for special privileges, so they get to pay special taxes. 95% of the American people pay their income tax diligently. And, well, all I can say is they probably need to do a little more homework on it. Now, and I'll also add this. If you're an employee, you're going to have a hard time getting out of paying income tax. But if you're not an employee and you're self-employed, you just probably need to do some more study on that.
Mm.
The bottom line is we are responsible for the money for the fortune that God has put into our hand. And we should be doing the best of our stewardship to make sure it's not being used to fund foreign wars, kill babies, and do all kinds of other horrendous things.
Mm. You mentioned that for you, that you're not on a particular side. You're not advocating partisan politics, right? But I know that there's going to be some people who are listening to this or watching this who are going to say, "Oh, but you just did it right there because you said the buzzwords, right? You talked about abortion, right? You're talking about things that this one particular group is advocating for. So people are going to say you are being partisan, right? You're far right, right? So what would you say to someone that has that low for you?
Okay, I'm pro-life and believe babies are are to be protected in the womb. You don't agree with that, but let's see what we can agree on. Maybe we can make life easier for people to adopt babies.
Mm.
Let's find out the issues that we can agree on and let's work on those. Because I believe in building bridges, not walls. So when I come across somebody, because I understand, I ran a crisis pregnancy center in Colorado for 2.5 years with my wife. We started it. And the girls would come in, we heard their stories, and we always told them this. The ones that were going to go ahead and have abortion we'd say to them, God loves you. And if you have this abortion, you just remember we're still here for you because you're going to need somebody to talk to who's not going to condemn you. We will not condemn you for what you've done. If you pray to God, you won't do it. When you go out that door, it's on you. It's your choice. And we know we're going to pray for you because we know how hard it is for you to deal with that guy who left you with this bag of problems. You're all alone, but you're not alone. You got to remember Jesus is with you, and you got to remember we're right here. We're not going away. You had our telephone number to find us. If you need us in the future, we'll be there for you. And that's how we convey our love to people who are on the other side. We don't win these arguments with anything other than good answers coupled with love. Jason, I was at Colorado State University. I was 27 years old, going back for a second degree in a classroom with 18-year-olds. And they brought in John Wayne Renfro. Now, this is 1975, 76, somewhere in there. John Wayne was out of the closet homosexual. Well, this was a long time ago. Well, normally this psychology class would have 300 kids in it, but that day there were 450 because they wanted to hear John Wayne Renfro. Well, John Wayne got done. They want to take questions, and my friend looked at me and said, "You do it." Okay. So I quoted a couple verses from the book of Romans. And as soon as I started, a few kids got into, oh, he's quoting the Bible, and they started kind of heckling me. But John Wayne and I went back and forth, and there was nothing I could tell John Wayne that he probably had not heard a dozen times. When class was over, I went down in the front of the room and I sat and talked with him for a few minutes. The professor came in and he said, "You guys are going to have to take it outside because I got a class coming in." Jason, I did something totally impromptu. I took my Bible and I put it under my left arm, and then I put my right arm around John Wayne Renfro. And he was a big guy. This guy was totally articulate, was making his points. He was basically winning the argument. We went up the steps, we got out in the hall, and the guy was total mush. He couldn't he obviously couldn't put a sentence together because this Christian guy put his arm around me and loved me. And that's when I learned, okay, I got to listen to people well, and I got to love them. And then I got to give them some good answers. I can't come across as some nitwit. I should study to show myself approved, a workman who need not be ashamed. But my bottom line is, love them. Love your enemies. The Democrats aren't my enemies. Libertarians aren't my enemies. The Party Green isn't my enemy. Those rhinos aren't my enemy either. Look, I'm pro human life in the womb. I'm also pro life regarding all these foreign wars that our country is involved in, and the hundreds of thousands of people have died around the world because we left. I think my friend said we have put, since the beginning of this century, we put over 300,000 bombs onto the earth, this country. Either we've done it or our allies using our bombs, like in Ukraine, have done it. 300,000 bombs. No country on the earth, China, Russia, those guys haven't bombed 300,000 bombs. We've done that. I'm opposed to these senseless wars. We got Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi was a Democrat. Now she's a Republican. But basically, she hasn't changed very much. She's against war. She's against the kind of senseless killing that's going on in the world so that some people can get extremely rich. One of the books I encourage people to read is War is a Racket by Smedley Butler. War is a racket. Here's the most decorated Army officer up till World War II who said war was a racket. He said it was just thousands and thousands of people making millions and millions of dollars, and the loss is in blood, the profits in money. All the people who have died so that some people can become extremely wealthy. No, as a Christian, we should be consistent. We're pro-life all the way. We're also pro-truth. We have to go into dark places and cast light upon darkness. That's our job. And I found that far too many Christians have looked for places that are comfortable. We want churches that are comfortable. The disciples didn't know much about comfortable after Jesus left. 11 of them were martyred. John was exiled. Took care of Mary, but they all suffered. And suffering for righteousness' sake is just part of being a Christian, but by golly, that doesn't mean we ever hate anybody. We always love, because love is the reason he came, for God so loved that he gave. We give our love to other people in his name.
And you know that word love, right? I think it's foundational to our faith, right? The Bible says that God is not just like a loving person or he has a lot of love. It says God is love, right? But people use that word love to justify certain behavior. Like they say, well, we can't speak against homosexuality because God is love, or, God loves everybody. So we can't say that, or, we can't make people feel bad because they're doing this or that. Right. And I think that word love can sometimes be misunderstood. And I think the example you gave with the gentleman who you put your arm around, now some people might have been afraid to do that, or maybe that lack of love, right? Oh, they would have been too embarrassed to do that, or they would have felt like it isn't manly or something like that, right? But I'm sure that he really needed that. He was probably lacking that in his life, so that probably, I'm sure, made a huge impact. But you have some people who are saying things like, there is a popular video that's been circulating recently where it's showing a clip of a lot of different pastors who are basically saying we shouldn't speak against homosexuality because look at heterosexual people. They are, uh, fornicating. They're having, there's men they're having, multiple women and things like that. So how can we speak out against this one thing when people are doing this other thing? And they say that's not loving to do, right? But what would you say to somebody who would use that and say, basically to justify a particular lifestyle?
John the Baptist spoke out against Herod when he took Herod's, the brother's wife. He spoke out against it. We don't speak out just against homosexuality. We speak out against fornication. We speak out against adultery. We speak out against all forms of sexuality that are outside God's law.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean we don't love the people. My sons have all been involved in theater. When a theatrical performance is over, they ended up coming to our house. We've had situations where half of the people in the room were homosexuals. As theatrical people are, it's a much higher percentage of homosexuals in theater than there is in the NFL.
Right, right.
Uh, but they were just nice people. Homosexual people are really nice people most of the time. You have some army type, they're belligerents, but the great majority of homosexual people are decent people, and I don't have any problem being in my house, that's for sure. We're all sinners saved by grace. The problem comes when I don't know of anybody who's going around saying adultery is a great thing and we ought to have adultery all over the place.
Right.
But we don't have anybody doing that. We don't even have anybody going around saying abortion's a great thing, we just need to have more of it. No. But the homosexual crowd, a certain segment of them are getting rather militant about it. And we have a real problem with the militancy. And that's where we have to really speak out against that. God loves you, and you start taking a proudful attitude regarding sin. There's never been any marches down the street in New York City advocating adultery, right? I don't know of
Right.
any. And I hope they never is. The problem with the militant homosexuals is that they need to be confronted with love, always with love, but we have to have answers. It's our job to do this. When I was at Colorado State University, I used to go down there once or twice a month. I go on the free speech wall and I would preach. My friend, Vern, would always preach a hardcore gospel message. I let him go first. I went second, and I always preached on, pornography. How pornography is an attack on women. I took my high school students, I ran a Christian school back there. I took 7 of them down there. I said, now, when I start preaching about pornography, those guys are going to start heckling me. We spent 3 days studying how to refute specious arguments in defense of legalizing pornography. 3 days, maybe 4 hours total. And I said, now, when they start heckling me, you go over there and talk to them because they're going to start throwing those arguments at you and you're going to be ready for them. Hey, I started talking. Sure enough, they started heckling me. And my 7 students went over there. And this night, the 4 of them were rather pretty girls. And those guys didn't want to heckle me when they could talk to a 16-year-old girl that was really attractive.
Mhm.
What they weren't expecting is to have 16-year-olds refute every one of their high-sounding arguments. We got done. I was refreshed because I had all these young women out there who were saying, "That's right, that's right. Yeah, preach that, that's good." When I went back to the van, my 7 students all said the same thing. "Wow, that was amazing. We really felt like our faith came alive." They went as Christians, but they went armed with the knowledge of how to handle tough arguments, and it made their life come alive. I believe in political evangelism. We use politics as a mechanism in order to gain opportunity for discussion. And when I discuss these things with people, one of the rules I have is I'm not going to interrupt you. And if you interrupt me, there'll be about a 2-second pause before I ever answer any of your questions. And it always stops the arguing. I let them talk. Then I talk for a little bit and ask them a question, and I let them talk 80% of the time. I want them to talk to me. I want to learn what they've got to say. And then I'll try to come up with a couple of good questions for them and hopefully get them one-on-one, away from their peers, away from their pressure, so that I can then talk to them one-on-one about the real issue in life, which is Jesus. But I might spend an hour with them talking to them about defense spending or about fentanyl or drug abuse or something like that. And we might have different strategies out, or we might be totally in disagreement. But I'm listening primarily to gain the opportunity to share a bigger, heavier truth. I'm trying to gain that opportunity to speak to them by listening to them, listening very closely to what they're saying.
And that's important because there are some people that are very vocal, who, when they do have a public platform, some very well-known Christian people, they use that not as an opportunity though to bridge the gap, but it seems to divide people more. And there's a popular clip right now of a pastor. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but he basically is saying, if you vote Democrat, you're not a Christian. He basically just says it straight out. And I know that there's a lot of people that have an issue with that, right? As far as, as you mentioned earlier, political parties, right? George Washington, he wasn't advocating for that, right? He knew that that would divide the country. I see it the same way with denominations, right? We have so many different Christian denominations. And I think that while a lot of them, the way that they started out with good intentions, right? The Methodist denomination, it started out because it was it John Wesley, right? And his brother. They developed that particular denomination, not necessarily just to start a denomination, but it had to do with the way that they wanted to, interpret the word in a more methodical way, right? Which is why they're called Methodists, or like Baptists, who they were strong advocates of, water baptism, and they thought that, the church was getting away from that, right? So there's different times where these different denominations start, and it seems like they start out well, but what ends up happening later down the road is it's kind of like a us versus them kind of thing. And I know that that's not Jesus's intention for the church, for there to be this church, that church, unless we're talking about locations. But when we're saying, no, we just have these whole set of beliefs over here, and we don't like those people over there, right? So politics is similar. When it comes to political parties, it seems like I see a big connection between that and denominations. So when it comes to like this individual that basically said to people, if you vote Democrat, you're not a Christian. What do you think about that approach? Do you think that, like, if you had the same opportunity to speak to this crowd that he was speaking to, how would you use that opportunity, and how would you word it instead?
Well, I know that I have actually said that.
Okay.
I've said that. If I would not say you're not a Christian, I'm just simply saying voting for a party that has changed so radically in the last 20 years. We're not talking about the party of John F. Kennedy. We're
Mhm.
not talking about the party of of Jimmy Carter. We're talking about a party that is now very radically pro-abortion. To vote for that, I I I talk to my Democrat friends at church, and I'll say, "I don't know how you can do it. It's, very difficult," but I would never say, "Oh, you're not a Christian." I leave that to God. God can judge the hearts of men. I can't. I just think it's something that's wrong. It needs to be discussed. Um, I often say to people, I try to educate them. I'd say, um, "Are you aware that in 2005 or 6, the legislature in South Dakota set aside one whole week for nothing but discussion on abortion. And at the end of that week, they brought in a high definition video of an actual abortion. When we got done watching that video, they took a vote. Mind you, this was for no exceptions for rape or incest. Hardcore. At court, not surprising, every Republican voted yes. Not a majority, but close to a majority of the Democrats went along with it.
Mhm.
South Dakota governor signed the bill, but the Planned Parenthood and National Abortion Rights Action League came in, found a sympathetic judge that held it in sway until the people could vote on it in a proposition. The people in South Dakota didn't get to see the video. They just saw 30-second, 60-second spots on television talking about the women who had such terrible experiences because they couldn't have an abortion. So 54-46, the measure passed, and went right back to having abortion again. All I'm saying is, if you're pro-abortion, then you should watch the video. You should know what you're pro about. Look,
Right.
Lincoln turned to Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. And he said, when he met her, he said, good to meet the woman who started the Civil War. People didn't know how bad slavery could be until they read her book. And that galvanized abolitionist actions in the North, pushing for war. And so fortunately, we went to war over it instead of finding the solution that England came up with, which was basically, let's all suffer together. Let's pay for the freedom of the black slaves. And, but no, no, no. The white people in the North, they decided, well, we're just going to abolish slavery. And it's a story onto its own. It's just a very tragic situation. People didn't listen to each other, and we ended up having a civil war, and 500,000 Americans died. And almost all of those were white people. There weren't that many black people who died in that war.
Yeah, that's a interesting way to look at it because, right? Because the thing that they were fighting so hard for, a lot of them didn't even live to see it, right? So it's like, what were they really fighting for at the end of the day? Was it worth it, right? For those who wanted to hold on to slavery, right? So yeah, that book was impactful. And speaking of the power of books, I know that you have written a couple of books, and one of them is on parenting and leadership. And I think that this is really important, especially since, as we were talking before about engaging the culture, right? And speaking to people who don't know Christ. And a lot of people are dealing with, issues with their parents. And sometimes these things uh, kind of push them away from the Lord, or it's like a stumbling block to them accepting the Lord, this is why I think it's so critical that there are more resources like this resource that you have for parents, right? Because we play such a major role in the lives of our children. So you have a book, it's called Parenting the Passive Rebel. So how do you, what are like maybe one or two lessons from that book that you think are really important that can help parents as they are, raising their children in this world that we're living in?
I point out the fact you have to take time to clarify and discuss with your son or daughter why we have to have the rule. And then you have to be consistent. One of the things I bring out in the book is of a woman. She understood this very well. She explained to her 5, 6-year-olds, this is the way we have to behave when we go to the grocery store. We can't get everything. Here's our list. This is why we're going. And we're not going to get anything else. We're just going on this list. Well, he's only 5 years old, so he's going to kind of forget that. She had it all planned out. She knew if she got in line, you know what they do right there at the checkout? They've got all this candy stuff and all the stuff that grabs the attention of the kids. He started whining for something. And she had it all planned out. She turned to the checker and she said, I'm going to leave my cart right over here. I hope I'm back in 5 or 10 minutes. If not, just go ahead and put it all back. And she took her son out to the car and had a discussion as to why you don't behave like that in the store. And by golly, she went home. He didn't get the message. So that night they're sitting around the table and there's no milk.
Mm.
The reason why there's no milk is because you didn't behave in the store and then you got in the car and you didn't behave. Now we're going to go back tomorrow and I trust that you're going to get it right. And he did. See, she had it planned out. She wasn't leaving things to chance. She knew what the possibility of a conflict was going to be, so she was prepared to deal with it. And this is a beautiful thing. If you take the time to work on that when they're 5, 6 years old, 4 years old, wherever that is, whatever the issue is, if you take the time to clarify it and then consistently hold to it, you're not going to have these battles when they're 8, 9, 11, 14 years old because they were taught early. It's clarification, it's consistency, and we're also listening to you. We want to hear what you've got to say also. Even you're only 5 years old, we want to hear what you've got to say. In my book, I have the 5 no's. I don't have that book in front of me, so I can't go through them, but I point out 5 no's. Don't do this when you're dealing with your children. And the last one is, the worst one I always say at the end is, just ignore it. No, that's the worst thing you can do.
Right.
You have to deal with it, and you have to take the time to deal with it the right way. If you're in a hurry and you're under all kinds of stress, that's not the time to correct anybody. Wait until later when you are quieted down, you take your son aside and you sit in a chair and you just talk for 5, 10 minutes. I have a grandson. He gets volcanic at times. I'll just take him into a room and I'll say, no, just sit there. Just sit there. We'll be here for 10, 15 minutes. But after 10 or 15 minutes, he quiets down and now we can have a discussion. I'm not going to raise my voice and yell at my son. Or my grandson. I don't have to do that. I just take the time. That's one of the problems. Parents are usually pressurized. They don't understand that a little bit of time taken now can save so much problems in the future. Clarify, be consistent. That consistent thing is tough. But the better we get at it, the better those kids are going to be at an earlier age.
Hmm. That's really a powerful thing, right? Just understanding. You said knowing basically what you're going to do, right? Having an idea in mind, like if they do this, this is how I'm going to follow up on it. But I think a lot of parents are just kind of doing it in the moment. They're just trying to figure it out as they go along, and they're not really parenting on purpose as much.
They're winging it. They're winging it.
Yeah, but especially I think it's just so critical, in these days, right? You have, especially I'm thinking of much, younger parents who are coming up now, right? Imagine parents who are in their, you know, maybe late teens, early 20s. They have a lot more distractions as parents, even than just 20 years ago, right? So you have some parents that it's hard for them to take that time to really have that conversation, to sit down with their child and say, okay, these are the consequences for your action, right? They're thinking about, well, I need to pay attention to what's going on my phone, or I need to go do this, or whatever. Let me just give them whatever they want so that they can stop crying because I'm busy. I don't have time to deal with that, right? So I think we're, losing that art of holding kids accountable because it's just easier not to, right? So what encouragement would you have to like young parents who are maybe in that situation, or who they don't really see the seriousness of this?
Well, you mentioned the phone.
Mhm.
That baby's got to be turned off a lot. It's just too much of a distraction.
Mhm.
It's a beautiful thing, but it's very hurtful to good communication. I just put it on do not disturb. I miss a lot of calls, but it's necessary in order to have good conversation to turn off the phone for a while.
Mhm.
It's not an easy thing to do, but when a young couple comes together, if they could just have some good conversations about this is the way we've got to do it, and we've got to be consistent together. Mom and dad have to be on the same page, and then clarify it and consistently monitor the action and have sit down conversations with your kids. Like where I go to church, um, it, it's not a real loud place. So you have to train your children at home. All right, we're going to take 10 minutes right now. We're going to listen to some songs that are similar to the ones they have in church, and we're just going to practice being quiet
Yeah.
and listening. And they'll move it up to 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So they go to church. Hey, we practice this at home. Practice, good practice makes perfect conduct. If you want them to behave properly in a certain location, hey, you can practice at home.
That's a really good idea, right? It's practical.
Yes.
It's like, okay, let's not let the first time we're in this situation be at the worst possible time for them to be learning it, right? Let's just learn it ahead of time. Yeah, that's good.
I want to share the the problem of my book. The reason why I wrote the book was a young boy named Doug. Doug is probably 50 years old now, and he's a very, very intelligent guy. But he was in my school, and we had modules. Every student was working at their own pace, and I would go over and Doug, you're not working again. Give me that Rubik's cube. Where'd that come from? What do you got that? Give me that book. You got to get. I would be on his case all the time. And he wasn't getting his work done. Finally, after about I don't know how many weeks, I went to the pastor and I said, "We got to disenroll this kid. It's like theft. We're taking money from the parents, and he's not doing anything." So he said, "I'll call her in." He came back. He said, "Oh, she's crying her eyes out. We got to keep him." I said, "Okay, I've already been thinking this out. We'll keep him under one condition that Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, and Thursday night, he goes home with me. And I apply one rule only. If you do not work, you do not eat.
Mm.
The Bible says, "The man will not work, neither shall he eat." Proverbs says, "A man's hunger works for him, for his appetite urges him on." So I took Doug home with me. He didn't do any work all day long. I didn't bother him. You want to play the Rubik's Cube all day long? It's up to you. But when we went home, go to your room and get your work done. 8 o'clock, 6 o'clock, it's time to eat. Doug, have you got your work done? No. Okay. 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. Doug, it's time to go to bed. Aren't you hungry? No. What? Okay. 6 o'clock, I got up early. I wanted to make sure I was near the refrigerator. And at about 6:30, Doug comes out and I told him, I said, "Doug, this is your house. My house is your house. If you're hungry, go get something from the refrigerator after you've done your work." I said, "Doug, do you have your work done?" "No." "Well, Doug, you know the rule." "Yeah, but I'm hungry." "Yeah, I know you should be hungry. Go get your work done." Doug went back to his room. We had to go to school. By 9 o'clock, Doug had all of his work done. We checked it, made sure it was good. I said, "Doug, go down to the cafeteria. The lady's waiting for you. There's food for you to eat. You don't have to do today's work. Yesterday's work's done. That's what it was, the program. So now you're done. You can go eat."
Mhm.
I did this with Doug for about another 7 weeks, and he got his work done consistently. I never had to tell him what to do. I didn't have to go around and bug him. The rule was, though, you know what the rule is. If you don't have your work done by lunch, then you can't go out and eat. You're going to sit right in here and keep playing. But he just decided, this is stupid. I'm going to get my work done. He was bored. He didn't like the kind of book work that we were doing. But he came to the conclusion, kind of senseless not to get it done. He got it done. It was such a wonderful experience because I recognized, gee, the Bible's really got it together. God wrote this on a piece of paper thousands of years before, but it applied just as well to us today. If a man will not work, neither shall he eat.
Wow. So yeah, there's so much wisdom that you shared today, just as far as as Christians, our responsibility to engage with culture, you know, making sure that we understand the laws that govern where we live, right? Understanding the political process, the judicial system, parenting, there's so many things, right? So I really appreciate you, sharing everything that you did today. And I know that you promised those who are watching or listening to this that you had something for them. So I want to give you just the opportunity to explain what that is for them.
In my affidavit, I have an initial paragraph that spells out to the offending person his response or her responsibility to answer the affidavit. Then I have the body of the affidavit, which depends upon the circumstances. I had an affidavit regarding my right to travel in an automobile. I have another affidavit that I used for a bench warrant that was put out on me back in South Dakota many years ago. All cases, no victim, no crime. I had another one where I went after a chief medical officer that was telling everybody they had to close their restaurants. Yeah, I'll close my restaurant and go out of business. Well, he was violating federal laws in doing that. Nobody was calling him on it. We called him on it. He refused to repent, and he ended up having to lose his job. So Best Buy said I had to come in with a mask on. I said, no, no, no. There's no law that they have to wear a mask to come in your store. We had to go to court with that one. We had a assemblywoman who was trying to pass a law that would make our pastor a felon for simply counseling somebody about sexual dysphoria. We had to serve her with affidavits, and she backed off on that law. So our affidavit has that important first paragraph. The body depends upon the situation. But the last paragraph is also very important. We specify here, Jason, that you have 30 days to rebut the specifics of the affidavit. Otherwise, everything in it can be used against you, Mary Johnson, Governor Newsom, can be used against you in any court in America. We're not saying we're going to sue. We're just warning you. If you don't rebut this, this can be brought into a courtroom as prima facie evidence that you were notified and you continued to break the law. They hate getting letters like that. I had to send one to my supervisor, my county supervisor. It's the only time he's ever called me up on the phone, and he was not happy. He was very upset. I said, well, just follow the law. That's my job as an American citizen, a Christian, to hold you accountable to the law. So what the free gift is, you go to affidavitsecrets.com/FIYA, and you will get the template. That's affidavitsecrets.com/FIYA. You can go to remedyatlaw.us and you will find a way to contact me, remedyatlaw.us. Anybody who needs assistance at this stage anyway, I'm not overworked. If somebody just wants a phone call, a question that I can help them with, that would be something that's available to them. That's at remedyatlaw.us. And that has a nice video that explains the remedy, the affidavit process to somebody who's not very clear on it. My friend Jerry Day does an excellent video in 5 minutes explaining the power of paper. I have a course that's available for anybody who wants to go through and understand this and become more well-versed in how the power of paper works. That's it.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, I'm on it right now. Just checking it out. Definitely looks like it's going to be a very informative course. The free resource that you provided, everything here is, I think, is going to be very beneficial to people, because a lot of what you shared today, there's so many that are just lacking this information, right? They don't teach these things in school, unfortunately. So there's a lot of people who are going to be misinformed.
They don't teach them in church either.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they really, really need to be taught. Because as I said, it's political evangelism. We're out there to win hearts and minds. It's not change policies necessarily, although there's nothing wrong with changing bad policies and making them better. We want a good world. We want a world that cares about people. We don't want to give people simple answers that end up causing all kinds of problems. Sometimes it takes some hard truth. But if we get down there dirty with them and help carry their load, people can be won to Christ when we love and we share the burdens that they have in life. I do want to mention one other thing. I did write the other book. It's been written. It's not published yet. It's entitled Officer Hanson, Compassion in Blue. It's about a police officer who believes that violence can be eliminated if police officers show a lot of common sense, compassion, and patience. And the stories in the book are actual stories of police officers and how they dealt with situations. And it's pretty amazing how some of these cops really love people.
Kirk, thank you again for joining us and just sharing everything that you did today. And I'm sure that everyone is going to get some great use out of the resources that you mentioned. I'm going to go ahead and also drop the links to everything that you mentioned in the show description. That way people can find it more easily. All right. So really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you for having me. God bless you guys and may you continue to do well. I wish I could have much like.
We'll have to meet again in the future. Hopefully, maybe once your new book, Officer Hanson, once that comes out, maybe we can meet again, discuss some of the topics there. That would be awesome.
Got it. Thanks, Jason.
Yep, no problem.